Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. I have a guest returning today, Anthony Mannara, Adjunct Professor Anthony Mannara. I think I have you back just so I could say Adjunct Professor. You don't get to say that every day.
There you go. Right.
Welcome back to the Gritty Hour, Anthony. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Tom.
So, what's going on in your world? What's going on? Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in society and the climate and the politics.
Yeah, a little bit. I'd like to stay away because I know some of our viewers have different viewpoints and different political beliefs of who's the
Yep.
right candidate. But I think overall the country is feeling a little bit lost in that, the judicial system is not upholding its checks and balances. I think that there are a lot of decisions, some opinions that we've heard on the news, depending on what channel you listen to, I guess. But the recent Supreme Court decision of the 14th Amendment was well expected. However, it seems as though they're rewriting the Constitution a little bit, and that the Supreme Court is tossing the decision to the uh, the Congress as to whether a person should be enforcing Article 3 of the 14th Amendment or not. And it's pretty black and white as to what the way it was written. So there's a lot of feeling of distrust that is just continuing you know, uh, to surface on the part of what is going on. And, we're faced right now with a situation where we have two wars that we're financing. We have a Congress that's blocking aid to a country that is representing democracy in Europe right now and fighting for its life. Um, there just seems to be a lot that's out of control and is weighing on individuals. Now, some people seem to be blind to all of this and don't really care. I don't know if they realize, the history behind what NATO was all about, and the Marshall Plan after World War II, and the unification of Europe, and the fact that we are allies, and we have during World War II uh, had these treaties in place which would allow us to defend Western Europe. Um, it just seems to be at a teetering point right now, and there's just a lot of weight. I happen to have had a college buddy of mine. I ended up traveling to Europe with him after college, and his father was a four-star general in the Air Force and divided the post with General Rogers and General Smith. And he was in the Air Force, and General Rogers was in the infantry, and they were the supreme Allied commanders of Europe. So I might be a little bit more aware than a lot of people as to what it meant to go into the European history of D-Day and World War II, and to have actually touched the responsibilities that the United States has towards its allies. And for that reason, I don't know if everybody in this country is educated to the point where we have certain commitments. And even if we were, it just seems like people and commitments, they're sort of wishy-washy. No one really cares. It's just like, if we have a treaty in place, so what? We'll get out of the treaty, or we just think that we don't need it anymore. And it's a tough moment right now in the world. We also witnessed a couple of weeks ago the death of Navalny, and the distrust that's sort of put into the hands of Putin and the Russians at this moment. And that bordering with what's going on in the Ukraine, and what Israel and the Palestinians are doing in Gaza, and it's just a horrible moment. And I think that has been really on everybody's soul right now.
Right.
And I think it's been weighing down a lot of the optimism in the country. We're up against an election now. where some people are pro-Trump, some people just don't see him as a viable candidate. The issues with, and I don't know if Biden's age is really an issue, but they've made it an issue. And so, I mean, Trump is only 3 years or 4 years, maybe younger, but uh, in less better shape than Biden probably in terms of health or healthy habits. So I don't know.
Well, if I could, if you don't
Yeah,
mind me playing devil's advocate for what somebody might uh, take you to task on, and I'll just get your response to
go
what
ahead.
that argument would be without owning anything. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
The point number one is their argument on the NATO would be, NATO outgrew its relevance when the Berlin Wall came down, and we kept expanding after that, which was actually against an agreement we made with Russia. This is what people would tell you. And your second point about what were you saying about? Well, I'll go to your third point. I think a lot of the people's concerns about Biden, which includes in my daily life a lot of Democrats, is not so much his age, but his diminished faculties. So I don't know if they make an age an issue, but the way he presents himself seems to be less than sharp. And the bulk of what you were saying about treaties and such, um, a lot of people would argue that we are the ones that have already broken the treaties we may have had with Russia. I just want to see what your thoughts on that might be.
Well, um, as far as the NATO and the Berlin Wall situation, I think the Russians and the Americans have much different fundamental ideologies, and one considers humans or man is inherently good. The other considers man inherently bad. It's evolved since then, but I think we just have different approaches towards the philosophies of life, and they aren't yeah they're not synergistic. They can't really they don't have the same motives behind them. And the leadership, in fact, in Russia right now, as I believe, is much more autocratic than it would be in the United States. Our democracy, if you want to call it that, is being threatened right now. We do have three checks and balances, with the executive, legislative, and other branches that we put together. The electoral process is also a check and balance, but there's just a feeling right now that we can't really succumb to the fact that uh, we would like to be, although I think everybody should be an ally, it's much different. I mean, I lived in Europe for 22 years. I lived in Italy, and I could tell you that the oligarchs were buying up every major property that they could find in Italy. Berlusconi at the time was best friends with Putin. And there's great distrust in Europe right now for
Mm-hmm.
Putin because they feel that, if we give up the Ukraine, the next step is Poland, the next stop are the other Baltic countries,
Right.
and it's going to be aggressive. Um, and I fear that, Ukraine was part of Europe. It wasn't. It was part of Russia many, many years ago, but uh, he's now talking about Moldova, where he has Transnistria, which is a little Russian strip there. So he's got a bunch of fiefdoms from hardcore Russian people who are either former generals that have been planted in Belarus. They're in various parts of Europe, or I guess you can call it Europe, uh, but they're ready to sort of fall the way Crimea fell in 2014.
Hmm.
Uh, no one expected that to happen, and yet, he imposed himself there. Um, I, I can't speak for Putin. I don't know. I love the Russian people. The Russian people and the Italians get along very well. It's just that anybody who deals with Russians in business, they have tongue in cheek right now because they can't speak up against their ruler. They don't feel free. They don't feel that they agree with Putin's aggressive stances. Yet he's going to win his reelection because it's 90% sure that they're going to vote for him. The fact that he killed his only major political opponent a few weeks back is, it's just not the way we should operate. And it seems to be acceptable in a country like Russia. So I don't know. Let's just say that for now, it's not so much that NATO is outdated and that since the Berlin Wall fell, because that doesn't make it a secure guarantee that there won't be any Russian threat. I think that Russia is, or the Kremlin is always a long-term player. It's like a chess match. They wait for one thing to fall, then they'll take a piece, or they'll wait for another situation to come about and they'll take a piece. I don't believe in big conspiracies, but it is kind of strange that all of this happened coordinated with Hamas, the Middle East, the Israelis that are draining our financial capabilities right now to finance these wars, which are further weakening, our ability to react and has caused an upheaval in our own government. So this master plan strategy, I don't know if it was, you know, coordinated with the Chinese, and even Korea is acting up in Southeast Asia, and I don't know what to say, but it just seems like there is a global effort to try and make it as difficult as possible to make our economy and our political system survive. Um, then the other point you had made was
Well, I was talking
uh,
about the difference between the ageism and the actual recognition of his
yes,
the president.
capability to
Yeah,
function. I don't think any president really makes his own decisions. I think it's the people surrounding him. And what I do like about this administration was that it's much more predictable in that it makes rationalized decisions in terms of whether it's stimulus packages that he's reached across the aisle to get approved. So he's gotten a bipartisan approval on the Infrastructure Act or the Inflation Reduction Act. He's been able to pull down inflation since the COVID pandemic situation happened. Supply chains have sort of gotten their act together. It's still very expensive in supermarkets and in various products. However, inflation's at around 3.1% right now instead of the 10.6 that it was a couple of years ago. So monetary policy seems to have worked. Higher interest rates have come into play. I'm not all for higher interest rates because we have other repercussions that come from that, including the real estate markets, both commercial and residential. Commercial real estate obviously has been very much negatively affected by the fact that a lot of us are working from home. We're not going into an office anymore. Therefore, there's no need to have probably 20 to 30% of the commercial space that's out there right now. So banks that are building new buildings like JP Morgan on Park Avenue have built this humongous building. They're imploring that their employees come back to work. I think they've got it back up to about 3 to 4 times a week that they come into work.
right. A
But
lot of
it's still,
businesses are in that
yeah. And what
pace.
does that do socially for the people who stay at home and don't have offices anymore? My wife works from home. I work from home. We're at each other's throats sometimes just to get through the day, really. And it's like, I'm on the phone. Don't make any noise. And I'm like, all right. Yeah. All right. And so there's real hostility sometimes it breaks out. And
It has a social impact. Yes.
it really does. So it's a whole new world that is sort of an aftermath of what the repercussions are of the COVID situation, and we still don't understand all of the effects that have happened. We're still trying to see. I think that, banks that have been exposed to commercial real estate are going to have a rude reckoning pretty soon because rates are not coming down. They are staying up. And a lot of these contractors and developers that have committed to banks uh, to fill their buildings that have been built or renewed or whatever are not going to be able to make the mortgage payments or the construction payments that they've had. So economists, some of them at least, are calling for a rude reckoning somewhere between, I don't know, May and maybe June of this year, where a lot of the exposure out to these commercial real estate properties is going to have a big negative effect to the banks as well.
Right.
And not only that, but residential will probably be affected too, because in order to survive, these commercial banks, I mean, these commercial real estate properties will have to convert to residential to sort of make up the grounds. And if they do that, that's going to depress the residential market.
I'll glut the
So,
market. Yeah.
right. So, there are certain things that we don't understand yet that some economists have predicted could be negative, which could also negatively affect, the markets in general.
What is, in your opinion, because you teach macroeconomics, correct?
Correct.
What do you think is the reason why the Fed is reluctant? As you say, the inflation rate is coming down.
Well, their target is
That could be
2%.
arguable anyway, but why do you think they're hesitant to lower the interest rates?
Well, because they haven't reached their target of 2%, which is still, their target. They still want rates to be lower. And usually they want to see weakness in the economy, right? So they want to see, an unemployment rate that's rising, and they don't see that yet. So the economy, uh, in order to avoid fear of overheating, why stimulate it if it's doing pretty well at the moment, right?
Mhm.
What could cause a downturn is a commercial real estate collapse. So if there is, some kind of exposure to commercial banks or the commercial real estate market, it starts to collapse, then you're going to see rates coming down quite dramatically, and the Fed trying to prop up and stimulate the economy.
Yeah, that's what I've always said in my own personal observation. The Fed is generally reactionary, not anticipatory.
Yeah, I mean, it's also been a very difficult market to predict. I mean, who would have thought that, you'd be able to bring down on inflation and you still have unemployment relatively low levels, so 3.7%. So I think that's partially due to advances in technology, which allow you to match make jobs more easily. It's also the fact that a bunch of different factors, people are working uh, longer than what they would normally. At 65, people don't retire; they'll just re-enter the labor force.
Right.
So and people are also, getting into the labor force relatively quickly as
And
well. So
why do you just I'd love your opinion on why they stay in the labor force later. Is it economic reasons?
yeah, mostly people can't afford to retire. They're,
Right. So that's the systemic
401k.
problem then.
Well, that's a systemic problem also because, well, I was away from 1990 to about 2013 in Europe. And when I left in 1990, people had pensions. They had pensions in their companies,
Right.
and they would be able to fully vest after 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, whatever it is. And that sort of became a haven for managers who were under the gun to increase profits for shareholders to basically take a look at seeing who was getting vested or who was close to being vested and basically fire those people before they got vested. So then they
Or
could
buy them out.
overfund,
Yeah.
yeah, they'd overfund their pension plans. So a lot of that went on in the 90s and 2000s, 2010s. And, the CEOs would get bonuses because they would be, giving higher earnings performance to the companies and the shareholders. And that's a problem. And I think that, there's a lot of that went on, and that affected the mobilization of pensions became much more difficult. There's no more defined contribution plans. There were more, defined benefit plans. There were
Right.
defined contribution plans. So people put some money into their 401k, they'd get a match.
Right.
Generally, that match was not that much money to put into their 401ks. So if you weren't part of the program doing that at a steady job for many years, it all changes. It all changes
Right.
in terms of, how much you could contribute. So people have unsteady, and then we've had many hiccups in the marketplace. So 401ks, either people freaked out and sold at the lows, or, they lost a lot of their 401k.
Right.
So there's a lot of reasons, including the fact that people are just living longer. You have people who
Hmm.
used to live till, in their 70s, maybe late 60s. Now they're living to their 80s and 90s, and
I agree with you. There is a catch-22 involved in that, as you say, people that were fully vested in their pensions, if the managers of those companies are trying to maximize the returns, in effect, those pensions are going to be going up.
right.
So it's kind of a
It is
whichever way you look at it, you know?
the the important point, though, is that the individuals who basically lost their jobs are not entitled because they weren't vested.
Right.
So they spent 9 years instead of 10 at a job. They can't carry the benefit of those 9 years of having health pensions. So that was a major problem, and it's also bad CEO practice, and
Hmm.
a lot of it has occurred, and that's a major problem, and why people are still working.
Right.
So
No, I agree with you. It is systemic, though. There's, as you said, a variety of factors, but that would be a good illustration of one of the factors.
yep.
Yeah.
So I just think we're living a particularly difficult time with exogenous factors in our economy. Like the wars are definitely on everybody's mind. The fact that we're having issues between Israel, who's our greatest ally in the Middle East, and the Palestinian countries, and it's just a really it's even on campus. Who would have thought that the University of Pennsylvania, the Harvard and MIT presidents would be under the gun for their abilities to manage the dialogue of those countries and how they're working and how they are discussing the matters in the Middle East. And
I think all three of them lost their jobs because of their inability to um, verbalize what the policy of those particular colleges were.
yeah, but I mean, there's probably many more other than those three that have probably had the same issues. And
Hmm.
when it touches academia, we're starting to get some real issues that are really difficult to talk about in this country. It, presidents of universities go through probably one of the hardest vetting processes ever to be selected as a university president or a college president. And generally, they have to be the most qualified in their fields. And to have it touch two Ivy Leagues plus MIT. I mean, that's astounding to me that happened. Being in education, you're so close to it. You understand that they're revered as individuals in the organization. They really are,
Right.
and they are leaders. And for reasons that seem to be more political or other motivations, rather than just what they failed to articulate as the policies of how they handled things. If they were under the gun today, as even the Biden administration is pivoting on its stance of trying to get Israel to be more selective in the way it attacks the Gaza Strip to save civilians. I mean, this discourse is an ongoing, evolving process,
Hmm.
and um, it would have probably not affected the presidents of these universities if it had been discussed now. It's
Right.
because the voices are now being heard on both sides, at
Right.
least more so on both sides. So it's really a question of timing and a question of at the moment who is really after getting these people out of their jobs. So I don't know if it's just political or whatever it was. But
Well, the elephant in the room really is the pro-Israel. I don't want to say lobby, but is extremely powerful in this country,
yeah,
and to
yeah.
cross that
Well, it's
line,
obviously going to hurt Biden, right? I mean, it's been hurting him because
yeah,
now
well, to cross that line brings a lot of people with opposing viewpoints to that in jeopardy.
right,
It's just you can deny it if you like, or people do deny that, but it is the case,
yeah,
and it has been for since World War II, really. You know,
yeah, I know that. So we're living in a time right now where if you're a caring citizen in the United States, you're thinking about all this stuff. It's draining on your personal lives. We're sort of just watching this chess match in slow motion, taking place on strategic moves all around the world. And I think that to the individual lives, I mean, I've got two boys, and they're both in close to 30 years of age now, and I look at them, I remember them as children, and they're even looking back and saying, what kind of world did you bring me into here, and I said, well, it's your world now, you got to deal with it.
it seems things are off the rails. There's no question about it, and I
Yeah.
don't. I have no explanation as to what particular thing caused it, or who caused it, or why it's. But it is off the rails. I think any common sense person would agree with you on that.
So then we start to look at, the Biden Trump election. That's most likely what's going to happen. And you start thinking, well, if I like this guy, this is going to happen. If I like that guy, well, we don't really know. We'll see what happens. And it's like the choices, as you said, I don't think we have two good choices, right? We don't have
It's kind of
somebody.
sad that that is the two choices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. And uh, it's nothing we can do, but that's a choice that the voters are going to have to come up with and realize what's the lesser of two evils, and
Yeah.
we don't understand what that might be. um
When I saw you in we both live in the same area, and I had seen you in the street recently, and we were discussing threats to democracy, which seems to be the coined phrase nowadays with this election coming up. Um, One threat to democracy I see is any candidate that isn't a Republican or Democratic candidate getting completely shut out of the system, whether it be the media or you know.
well, you're talking about like the no names that
No, I'm talking. Well, I happen to like RFK Jr.
right, right.
for a variety of reasons. I can't say I agree with him on everything, but I can see as an outsider looking in that he's being completely shut out of the public discourse. He's trying, but he's been shunned by the Democratic Party, and
Well, I think so much of it has to do with money.
mhm,
If you're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, you're not going to get the funds from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party.
or their donors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So the money, so you're on an independent basis. What you can possibly hope for is to be a spoiler, right?
Unless
So,
you're Ross Perot and you can fund yourself, which most people can't.
well, he did, but he also was a spoiler, and that's the last time that happened when Clinton, got his blessing, and he dumped all his shares in support on Clinton at the time, and Clinton won the election. But it was
Well, that's the thing. He drew a lot of support from um, Bob. Was it Bob Dole? Oh no, it was. Yeah, it was Bob Dole, wasn't it?
who ran against him. I don't remember
Or maybe it
now.
was George Bush the
It
senior.
was George Senior. It was
Yeah,
George. Yeah.
yeah, for his second term. You're right. Yeah. So you're
So
right. He was the spoiler of that election. Yeah.
so I think RFK is an interesting candidate because everybody thinks, oh, Kennedy, wonderful, but it's his policies are, they're pretty conservative. He's trying to go off the the history of the Kennedy family. He has an ad, I think, that was controversial and upsetting to the family because it was the JFK ad that he sort of reinvigorated from the 60s and
Yeah,
put his own name on it.
yeah.
But uh,
That's been a an argument against him. Yes.
right.
Yeah.
But uh, I really don't know enough about his policies to have
Yeah.
made a difference. Now, will he be able to run and take away votes from the Biden administration? People thinking he's a Kennedy, yeah, probably some, but I don't
Well,
know
you
if he.
had mentioned a lot of his policies are right leaning, although environmentally, I don't see how anybody could argue that he's right leaning when he talk about environmental issues. But I think he would draw more support away from Trump than Biden if
Well,
the
that would
election
be
were tomorrow.
so. If let's say it's equal, right?
Yeah.
So then, what's the point of his effort if it's an equal? If he's going to detract equally from both, right? So that's the argument, and maybe that's why he's not getting so much support at the moment.
Well, Professor, do you see an apathy maybe growing among the voting?
Well, I'm hoping that there's not despair because if
Mhm.
people are saying, well, I can't change the world and it's not going to make a difference, I'm certainly, as a professor, hoping that I'm not telling my students to vote right or left, but I'm definitely going to tell them to vote. Half of my students are not even registered, okay? And they're college students. And uh, I'm going to insist that they get registered to vote because it doesn't make sense for an individual who's just about to begin his life. And this is going to be a very divisive and very long lasting effect on what's going to happen in the future. And, it's an important election. I just hope that they understand the process. Most young people don't. They don't understand how Congress works. They don't know how the Senate works. They don't know, the
And they
important.
should. I've had you on in a previous podcast with other teachers, other
Yeah,
professors, to talk about, in my opinion, the misguided education system in this country.
yeah,
If you're not aware of civics by the time you graduate from high school, then something's wrong with the education system in this country.
you're absolutely right. And I think that is a failure.
How a
And
bill becomes a law. I saw that in like fifth grade. That
exactly,
cartoon.
exactly. How a bill becomes a law.
Hmm.
And, most people don't know how a bill becomes a law.
Well, that's what. Where's the failure that they don't? What's the reason for that? That's what I
Well, I don't know if they should teach that in the history class or, they should just,
civics class. You
yeah,
can't have a
civic.
civics class. They have so
Well,
many
they
other
should,
different
but they should
classes.
make it mandatory. They
It should
should.
be mandatory. Yes, you should know what your rights are
And
and
what
what
how the
your
process works.
limitations to your rights are before you get a high school diploma. In my personal opinion.
You're right.
Yeah.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I don't know of any schools that do that. So,
Yeah. But to touch on your point, the one thing I am optimistic about, if we are left with Biden and Trump as our only two choices, uh, the ramifications might be long term, but the term won't be long term. They both would be single term. Whoever wins would be a single term president.
that's true.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump could go for 8 more years. He can only
No,
go for
he
4.
cannot. He's no, and definitely Biden could not. That is constitutional.
Yeah, it looks like he makes it through if he gets in, if he makes it through the 4 years.
Yes, when you talk about history, it's unbelievable how much what's going on currently is reminiscent of when Teddy Roosevelt was in the Bull Moose Party.
Yeah,
If you look at that era, you'll see a lot of correlation to today's era.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think that uh, one of the fragile points of our system is uh, a lot of it depends upon the integrity of the people who are in the place of authority. And you would expect integrity to be the highest level, but it doesn't sort of turn out that way. It turns out
Mhm.
to, uh, partisan politics and the ability of people to stay in power. And, why would I logically care and articulate my views on something that are my views, whereas just go with the party so that you keep your job and stay in power. And that seems to be what's been ruling right now. How do you feel about McConnell leaving? Do you have any thoughts on
Well, don't let the door kick you, hit you in the ass. I don't want to expound too much, but there's, I might have even mentioned this to you in a previous podcast, maybe not, I forget, but there's a lot of politicians that have overstayed their welcome in positions of power right now.
Yes,
I,
absolutely.
I think I had mentioned in one of our state of education podcasts, uh, Pat, what's his name? Pat Leahy, guy
Yeah.
in New England up there. I was in grammar school when he first became a senator.
Wow.
You know, that's not how the founding fathers designed or expected this to evolve to, where you make a career out as a politician.
Well, yeah. Well, also people are living longer. Well,
It
Mitch
has nothing
McConnell,
to do with. They should
80,
not be in power
80.
for 50 some odd years. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
care if you live to be 100. You shouldn't be a senator for 50 years.
Well, in back in the day when they were writing this stuff, I think the average life was probably like 55 or 60, So
No, yeah. Well, Ben Franklin lived to be 78 or something
yeah,
like that. So, but
yeah,
anyway, so that I was just trying to illustrate your point about the integrity of these people that hold positions.
yeah.
Um,
And also that goes to the argument, does the Supreme Court, should there be term limits, on people in the Supreme Court? Because they sit there and they're there forever. And, what's their issue? Nothing. All they got to worry about is that no one kills them, probably.
well, that's the thing. I've always thought that was a stroke of genius in having the not elected position with no time limit on your service. You can resign anytime you like, but there's no term limit, and you're not elected; you're appointed,
Yeah,
and that's what separates the judiciary from the other branches of government.
yeah.
You know, I
So,
think that's genius, actually. So I don't know if I'm antithetical to your point of view, but
well, it's a little bit difficult for a variety of reasons that historically have evolved. And, we have a 6-3 majority of conservatives to liberal judges right now. And, that's, I guess, until they start to die off, that's the way things are going to go.
well, that's the thing you have to ask yourself. If it were, I don't know what your political leanings are, but if it was 6-3, if it's 6-3 liberal majority, would people feel the same way about term limits and the Supreme Court expanding it to whatever?
And, there's just other issues as well. The whole, uh, Roe Wade decision and now we're dealing with IVF, and I don't know. I see it more scientifically uh, than other people. I don't know that frozen embryos could be treated as children. I think that that's kind of weird. Usually uh, they're cells, and if they aren't growing cells, and if there's no life, they can't exist on their own. They have to be implanted in a placenta, and that's when it becomes life. Right now they're just a cell, two cells, and they're frozen, and it gives people the ability to have children in the future. So I don't know what to tell you there. It's a difficult ethical decision to have to make.
Every time I hear about that science, I think of what's his name, Ted Williams. They froze him when he passed away.
Oh, really?
Like he's going to come back and play for the Red Sox in 2100 or something. Yeah.
So there's just so many things that technology has advanced that weigh on the future and the decisions of people that have created debate, which divides the country, and that's what's amazing. I mean, it, I like, I've got friends who are conservative. I got friends who are liberal. I'm an independent, so I'm not to the right or to the left,
As
and
am I. Yeah.
yeah, and so I have an open point of view, but it is definitely, you don't know what to say at a dinner table. if you're having a dinner with somebody because you don't want to piss them off.
You can't even talk about the Mets.
True.
A lot
So
of that, if I may, Professor, is the fracturing of the media. Really, uh, when I was a child, you had three channels of
yeah,
news that you could choose from. You know, Walter Cronkite or Harry Reasoner or whatever, whoever they were.
yes, yes, it's the media
And
system.
now those are the last areas that people go to for their news. You can get
Yeah,
your news every time you open your
phone.
laptop or phone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's there is this, whether it's intentional or uh, unintentional, a bias gets thrown out there, depending upon who's throwing it out there.
Yeah.
And where you get your news affects your outlook on society.
Well, society is changing. That's the thing. That's the whole
Yeah.
point of this
Is it
discussion.
being changed by that, or is it just changing on its own and that's reflecting it?
Yeah, I think the technology, the social media, the the development of sciences, all of this stuff is hitting the fan right now, and it's creating issues and it's creating division because there's the pros and the cons, and people see things differently, and one might be right, one might be wrong, or you don't really have the rights and wrongs. It's just the way society is, but it's very frictional, and you try to be a happy, good citizen and friends with people. And, some people's viewpoints are just so different than your own that, and it gets in the way sometimes of, wanting to socialize with those people. However,
I
and it's
agree.
not just to socialize between me and you. It could be my friend won't like you because he's extreme, so I can't invite you to dinner because he's coming to dinner to my house, and I know that you two could get into a big argument, and I don't want to do that. So that's what's going to happen, and
But you
it's
know what? You're absolutely correct. That's true. Yeah. I think you hit the
it
nail
just
on the
wasn't
head.
like
Yeah.
this even 10 years ago. It wasn't like this.
Right. I just did a podcast recently with a fellow who started an app, those apps you download on your phone called Ponderly, which is it's supposed to regenerate civil public discourse,
Right.
which which is at a premium nowadays. I mean, let's face it, it's a great time to be a nonconformist.
Or a lawyer, right?
It's always a great time to be a lawyer, it seems.
Right,
But
you can
yeah,
you can sue whoever you want. Oh
you get
my
them
God,
coming
there's
and
so many
going. It's like being a
lawsuits.
stockbroker. I'm not going to say, you get it on the sell side or the buy side. But
Yeah,
I have to commend the fella. His name is Amir. He started this app in an attempt. He points the finger at social media fracturing the public discourse, and he thinks social media is going to be the answer to bring back civil discourse, which seems to be missing in our society. That's one of the fundamental things I agreed with him on.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
here we are having a podcast.
Well, true. If social media is the one of the root causes, then social media can be one of the root
So solutions. Yeah,
solutions. Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
So
Agree with that.
just trying to be optimistic, Anthony.
No, I mean, there's always optimism. There's just a lot of friction, and it's very tiring. I find it exhausting. You can't live your life as calmly or as fancy free as you once did. You
Hmm.
have to tiptoe through the tulips, and it's sometimes tough. It
Yeah.
really.
To your
So
point, to your point about dinner guests, there's an awful lot of people I feel that are afraid to express their ideas on certain issues to avoid that confrontation.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I know people that hold back their opinions because they know, um, yeah, it's it's uh, it's definitely a serious problem, I think, and
Hmm.
people don't know how to really deal with it. And so they avoid. And I think this is another topic, which is part of the effects of the post-COVID period, is the loneliness of people right
Right.
now. The just mere fact that you're not sure or confident or feeling good about opening up and talking in discourse or whatever it is, it's affecting everybody's loneliness. The tension involved with working from home with a wife who's there, and it causes tension. So everybody gets pissed off and they start fighting, and it's just very lonely. It really
Right.
becomes, I just want to be alone. I don't even want to have these issues anymore. And it creates a society that even the fact you don't go to work. I used to love to go to work because I had colleagues, I had friends, there was a corporate culture, I felt a part of the organization. Now the fact that you don't go to work and you stay at home is more loneliness.
Right.
So
How are you teaching now, Professor?
well, I'm going into class, so
Okay.
but I'm just saying there was a time for a year and a half where I didn't because of
Right.
the COVID situation. And I find that a lot of students, some of them don't come to class as often as they should. And so I get on their case about it. Some school policies don't require it to be, you don't have strict policies that you have to come to class. You just have to come in once or twice during the semester and pass your exams. I said, how does that work? That doesn't make
How do
any
you
sense.
pass your exams
Exactly.
without
And
being
then
there?
they
Yeah.
ask for recordings of the class. So like Zoom, you're recording this. That's the way they want to learn is through Zoom. So I record a class and they could go and see it, but it doesn't give you the interaction. It doesn't get you to know the students. You can't instill any kind of ethics or morals into people if you're not interacting with them. And they're being reared, they're being trained, and I think
Right.
that the interaction's not there, the schooling's not there. That's part of the problem. So this whole aspect of character building or loneliness, it's a big major issue which I think isn't really recognized fully yet. And
Right. I
uh,
think historians for hundreds of years will be looking down at the way we treated the pandemic and the wisdom of shutting down. How wise that it, considering the ramifications that we're probably just starting to deal with now. But
yeah, no,
people,
absolutely, there's
as to
definitely
your
a lot.
point, there's people even now that are afraid to leave the house. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's a big lag effect. It takes years to understand what's going to happen or how it's happening and how society is changing. It doesn't happen like overnight. It's going to take years. So we're in those years right now where we're looking back and we're saying, my God, this is like growing hair. You look at yourself in the mirror, you don't realize your hair is growing, but at the end of a month, it grew a lot. And that's what's happening to society. It's going through the phase of change, and we're looking back now from 3 or 4 years ago, and we're seeing, my God, I don't even go into the office anymore. I don't have any friends and colleagues. I see them through the internet. I had a partner that I saw twice in my whole time at my company, twice at my company that I've had interaction with. That's it, two times. And I never saw him again. He was on all over the internet. And he lived in a remote area. And I lived, near Millbrook at the time and in the city. And it's just amazing. It's really amazing. It's
Yeah.
just that, and memories are very short too. A lot of people don't grasp on and connect the dots as to why we're living the way we are today because of what happened before. They just don't
Hmm.
understand that. So it's a whole new world, you
Well,
know?
you interact with, as a professor, you interact with younger people. Do you think attention spans have been affected by that too?
Yeah, I think the way we learn, we've integrated technologies into the classroom. We have slides. I give slides to motivate the class into the lecture that I'm talking about. So it's very concentrated, very condensed, less time for interaction between, give and take in terms of question and answers. That might be also the mere fact that they're just not willing to come up forward and ask tough questions. Uh, do they do their readings before class? No, probably not. But I test them on material that is in the class and in the lectures and in the readings of the textbooks. But it's becoming less personal. I wish there was more give and take and more time given towards interaction with students. And I do have office hours. No one actually off. I usually do it upon appointment. So if they want to talk to me, they can, and otherwise you sit in an office for 2 hours and no one comes, and
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
have better things to do with my time as well. But it's I just wish that we could, as a society, open up. I think once these elections are over with, whoever wins the election, it'll be one. I mean, one way or the other. It should. I don't know if it'll unify, but it'll take some of the controversy out of what's going on.
At least the stress.
Yeah, some of it, and the anxiety, because the media has done a masterful job of keeping you hanging every day with new opinions and
Yeah.
new predictions of what the Supreme Court judge will say this or whatever will happen, and it's just it's tiring.
It
It's
can drive you nuts if you watch. Sometimes you sit there and you watch the news after half an hour. I'm like, I can't take this anymore. You know,
yeah. I
I don't
mean,
know
you
what
can't
station you're watching, whether it's MSNBC or Fox or whatever. Just
exactly,
they all operate the same way. They all have to sell
and
commercial
then,
time.
and then you can't sleep at night because you
Yeah,
got
well, I
your
sleep fine
heads
because I don't put any credence in what they're saying in the first place. But you've been very generous with your time because I know you have an appointment very
yeah.
shortly. So I don't want to hold you up, but I do want to ask you one more question that should be in your wheelhouse. What do you think the stock market and even the bond market will look like as we go through the presidential election uh,
Look, I
process?
don't. I think politically, Biden's not going to want a downturn in the economy. So there's a lot of stimulus still out there from his acts, right? The Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, and all of that is adding to jobs. So that's keeping the buoyancy going. Barring the fact that we will have some kind of a recognition that the commercial real estate market is going to implode. I mean, there could be a dip, but it's I think monetary policy will come in, expand money supply, ease credit, ease the interest rates. So it shouldn't be a major catastrophe. I don't think that that's just not in the cards right now. I don't see it. So 2024 looks like it's GDP will probably grow at about 2.2%. That's what they're predicting at least.
Which has
Uh,
become the average. It's become the norm for the last 15 years, 20 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
China's predicting 5% growth, something like that. And if they do that, they need more capital, apparently. So it might be that, that we will have uh, economies with countries overseas that are also going to be better off than what they have been recently.
And they would
European,
have to hold more U.S. notes, I would think.
yeah, I mean, at these levels,
Right.
you've got short-term rates are like 5.3%. If you're looking at a 3-month, 6-month T-bill, inflation's at 3.1%. So you've got real returns of about over 2%. So
Right.
whether you could sleep at night because it's government guaranteed, and you don't pay federal, you pay federal, but you don't pay state and local taxes on your treasuries. So
Right.
you're getting a pretty good yield.
Well,
Uh,
even China, if they're predicting a 5% GDP growth, they're going to need the U.S. dollar. They're going to need to hold the U.S. dollar in their reserve.
but
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I don't see major catastrophe coming down. I could be wrong, but I think monetary policy will be there to save us if we do get into a recessionary environment. And uh, again, they'll just expand the money supply. They'll lower interest rates with that expansion of the money supply. Uh, by buying bonds, building their balance sheet, and putting liquidity into the system.
What's another generation we can pass the debt down to?
Yeah, exactly. My sons, they'll pay
There,
for
there you go.
it.
We're up to like their great great grandsons by now.
Yeah,
But
probably.
the future's always scary, whether it be now or 1,000 years ago. Future's always scary. It's the inherent nature of it.
Change is scary.
Change is scary, but it'll
Change
happen, and we'll all be fine one way or the
Adapting
other.
to change is the key to survival in this market.
Yes, yes. But
So
I do appreciate you coming on, Professor. Like I said, I know you have an appointment to go to, so we appreciate you taking the time to be on the show tonight.
thank you, Tom. I
And I hope you
appreciate
have a
it.
great night. We'll see you further on up the road, lad.
Okay.
All right.
Wonderful. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.